load balancing nodes. First we need to going to install here IIS server, the DMS and the standalone server. So this is a domain server, domain member server. So the domain member server, so we are going to add the IIS server. So normally the network load balancing service is a feature included in Windows Server 2016 and earlier versions. This service balances network traffic load sent to an NLB cluster on a TCP IP network. So the NLB cluster is a configuration of multiple virtual IP addresses. The network traffic load is balanced among the multiple servers on the clusters. Moreover, load balancers provides built-in redundancy by sensing any device failures on the network and redistributing the load over other devices. Load balancers are normally used to ensure reliable delivery of missions critical web application to a large user population basis. So in this one, so in this one, so we are now going to install the IIS server on the member server and standalone server. Okay, click next. So set as default. So here is the IIS web server. Click add. So next. So after that, you can press next, set as default, next, and then install. So it will take some time to install, so you can leave it as it is. So we will now go back to the standalone server. So this is a standalone server. The same process we are going to do is adding IIS server on this server, standalone server. So IIS features we are going to add now. So normally the internet service IIS is included as a component with the Windows 2003 and later versions. The service needs to be installed to allow the user access to the web service. So activating IIS enables the IIS based applications including HTTP, FTP, etc. to take full advantage of NLB. So we can close it. We will check the task, then the completion. So you can see here, so IIS, so the notifications on top right corner, so you can also just double click and check, okay, the installation is succeeds. So we will go back to the member server. So the member servers, just close it. So this is member server. So and then yeah, so it's successfully completed. So now we are going to so we're going to open that PowerShell. So we need to install that server. So NLB components of Windows OS must be installed on the server to enable the server to implement NLB for domain network. So that is what we are going to do. So I just opened the domain control. This is domain control. So I'm going to install NLB now. PowerShell. So PowerShell is a very powerful. So we can now run as administrator. So we will now enter this command. So this is case sensitive, so we need to make sure so the command everything is, you know, so it is not, if there is any typo, so you will get error message. So just make sure that there is no case sensitive, you know, there is no typo. Okay, so now it's installing, so we are going to do the same thing on standalone server. So on the standalone server, so we have to open the PowerShell. So PowerShells are run as administrator. Okay, so it's now started, the installation started. So once it's done, so you can exit the PowerShell. So we'll now go back to domain member server. So yeah, so it's completed. So exit. So the installation of network load balancing service is successfully completed here. So in the domain server, and then standalone server. Yes, here also is completed. So we can now exit. So we will go for next task. So our next task is configure configure a new NLB cluster. So we are now going to configuring a new NLB cluster. So a virtual cluster is a virtual combination of this resource of more than one computer on the network. The augmentations of the resource in a virtual cluster offers enhanced reliability and scalability compared to the limited features offered by the resource of a single server. So we can begin now. So domain server. So we can start from domain server. So we need to open the installed NLB. For that, we have to open Windows Administrator Tools and the network load balancing. So there you can see network load balancing. So right click, new cluster. So there you have to enter this host number. So the domain member host number 192.2. So here click connect button. So you will see the list of available configurations. So this is our existing 192.168. This is the current one, the one we are configuring. So we need to select that and then click next. Set is you can leave it as default. So next, click next. You will now here click add. So we need to configure this IP address 192.168.0.20. So this one by default the subnet mask is correct. So we will now click OK. So cancel, this one is wrongly pressed. Okay, So now, so we have done, so everything is okay now. Click next. So in the full internet name, you have to enter the domain name. I mean this computer name. So it's a domain. What's the host name of? So the host name of the uh, computer is. So I mean the domain server. So this is the domain, the host name of this. You can see here. So we have to enter it here, and then click multicast, and then click next. So everything is okay now. Click finish. So before that, you have to make sure if there is any, so network cluster, port roles, or 365. So everything is okay now. Finish. So you can notice here the NLB cluster is now created. So after creating the initial cluster nodes, you configure the DNS server on the network to provide the host name to IP address mapping that points to this domain servers NLB. To configure DNS for the new cluster node, so we need to perform here. So we need to add the server. Here you can click tools on the server manager, tools. There you have to select DNS. So domain name server. Sorry, I'm checking this on domain control. So we need to go back to the domain control. So this is a domain member server. So normally, so as I said before, so after creating the initial cluster nodes, we need to configure the DNS servers on the network to provide the host name to IP address mapping that points to the member servers NLB. So for that, we need to go to the domain controls, and then domain control, we need to add the DNS, install the DNS servers. So let me open my domain controls. Okay, so this is a domain control server. So in the domain control server, so we have to click tools. So on the DNS, which I have already done, so we can see it's a domain control. So practice labs, a domain control 01. So on the DNS manager, so we have to now click the forward lookup zones. So then click expand, then go to the practicelab.com, right click, and then create a new host. So double click, so it will open, so new window. Okay, so now it's open. So on the name field, we have to enter the domain member server host name. So we are now in a domain control. So we have opened the DNS, and we need to add this new host, and then IP address of the member server. So we will now click add host. The host was successfully created. So we will now click OK. So we need to add the new host again, so the new Windows open already. So we have now, so we will now exit the DNS manager. So the new host record is now created. So we have exited. So we will now, the next step is adding secondary node to NLB. So we have now done the configuring a new NLB. We have successfully configured. So we are now going to adding a secondary node to an NLB cluster. Okay. So we can now add server an existing cluster to augment the resource available with the cluster. We have the administrative rights on the servers, so that you are configuring. However, the prerequisite is not applicable in a case in case the configuring is done from a remote servers. So we can just refresh the NLB manager. So we will now go back to a domain control. So this is domain control. Sorry, domain member server. So this is domain member server. So after configuring the first node of the clusters, we can grow the cluster by adding more server to the cluster. In this task, we will add the second server to the cluster node on the member server, domain member servers, NLB. So for that, so to add the server, so we need to switch back to standalone server. So the standalone server, so this is standalone server. I just switch back to the standalone server. One moment. Yeah, so I can see this is standalone servers. Sorry, last time I said it's a member server. So we are now we are now going to add that server on the standalone server. Okay. So for that, device manager, tools, and the network load balancing manager. Here we can right click, just expand here, and then connect to existing. So we now going to add the member server on the standalone server. So let me NLB domain server 01. Yeah, that's correct. We can now press the connect button. So you will see the IP address 192.168.0.20. So now we will now click finish button. So you can notice here the displays the connection status pan change is connected. You can see here. is successfully added now. So we can expand and double check here. So we can also edit and double check if you want. Host property, just double check here. So this is different servers. So we will now right click. So on the domain we just now created this member server we just added here is on standalone servers. So right click, host, add to. So here, sorry, and just on the member server, right click, add to cluster. So we need to enter we need to add the standalone server hostname. So we are now in standalone server, so we are just adding this server on existing cluster. We need to make sure if there is any mistake. So before we press the next button or connect button, proceed connect button, so just make sure, because these all are very important. Okay, so connect button, and then we can now select. So this is the existing Ethernet. Click next button. So add host to cluster. So in this window, so is set as default. So keep the default selection. Click proceed next. So here, so just keep as it is. We can just keep the default selection and click finish. So it's now successfully added. So you can see here domain member server and then standalone server successfully added. Here we are now in a domain standalone server. So let me show you here. So one moment. So you can see here, so it's a server, domain server. So we have now added the cluster here on the NLB. Please note the network load balancing managers may appear to have stopped responding sometime. You need to, in addition, you may need, get disconnected sometime. So from the connection if you are doing a remote, so nothing to worry about that. So if you're doing on the physical servers, no worry about that. So we have done successfully. So the next step, so we need to go back to this one. Yeah, so we have to make sure the when you need to click on node network load balancing clusters, the top node is top node in the console, as you can see here, that on the tree on the right pan, on the left pan. So on the right pan you have to make sure the multicast operation mode, if it is different cluster mode, you should switch back to multicast is a correct one in order to work the network load balancing. So keep the network load balancing clusters windows open. So for the next activity. So NLB, the next one is we are going to examining the working of NLB cluster. So let's go for it. So examining the working of an NLB cluster. So normally NLB manages traffic to each host on the cluster by distributing the client requests as per the rules configured for the clusters. The client request can be from a single client or from multiple clients. So the host on the cluster receives the request and responds according to the configuration rules specified for each of them. So NLB can help speed up data transfer from client to server by routing packet of this same data to different hosts on the cluster. So this package then coverage. So this package coverage at the requesting host. In this task, we will create a two separate web page on the two hosts on the NLB clusters. Then we will access the web page or the cluster browsers and differentiate how the client requesting are coming from both the host on the cluster. So we will now go back to the member servers. We are now in the domain standalone server, so we will now go back to domain member server. So we are now in the member server. So click the file explorer here. So we will go and install the we're going to open the page, IIS page. So just double click IIS page here. So the page is open already. So we can now you can see here the IIS page is open. So in this page, in this page we can see so in the file explorer you can see here IIS startup is just double click the paint page. So you can just edit anything. So file, there is the edit button. So one moment. So here you can select, so just type the any name. So here I'm going to enter NLB test. Just type NLB test here, just yellow color, and then click just for test. That's it. Okay, done. So we can now save the image. We can now close the connection. We can now close this browser which I opened just before. So and then close the paint, exit the file explorer. So you can now close it. So you can now open the Internet Explorer. So type http pl abdm01. You can see here NLB test. So NLB test is added successfully. So you cannot notice here. So now we switch back to the standalone server. So this is a domain member server. So we are now going back to the standalone server. So this is a standalone server. So we are now going to check the same thing. Just double click the Internet Explorer. We are going to check the same thing, HTTP, but how to check the server name, PLAB SA01. So you can see here in this standalone server. So here the notice that the image displayed here is different from one displayed in our Windows domain, what we did in a domain server, so domain member server. So we added some text there. So here we didn't add it. So when we open the server, the domain server here, the host name, so we don't see there is no modification, there is no test here. So we can just close it. So we will now, the final task, we are going to see configuring and validating port rules. So this is configuring and validating port rules for NLB cluster. Let's go for it. So the port rule for NLB controls the traffic management and working of the cluster. So any host added to the cluster after the first host automatically inherits the cluster port rules from the initial host. Rule specifies the value of parameter including the IP address, the port range, and the protocol of operations. So here, so configuring port rules. The NLB port rules control how the NLB cluster functions. Yeah, port rules mainly defines the following two operational. The one is affinity. So I would say that the available one is affinity or filtering mode. Affinity is this is a method used to associate client request to cluster host. When no affinity is specified, all network requests by clients are load balanced across the cluster without regard to their resource. So filtering mode, so can be single host or multiple hosts. This specifies how the cluster handles traffic described by the port range and protocols. So in this task we're going to define the port rules for the two hosts added to the cluster. So to configure the port rule, so we need to go to the domain member server. So let me open my domain member server. So this is a domain. So this is my domain member server. So on the domain member server, so we need to open the PowerShell. So make sure this administrator rights. So we need to type NMD NLB port. Notice this the command creates the NLB folder under C. So after that, clear the screen first, so we will understand that. So connect. You will now, so let me open X, copy -S, and then C init pub space NLB port. So the file is copied. So I am copying this file, the HTML file to here the NLB port. So you can see here. C dash, there is a mistake I guess, let me type. Okay, C init pub www root. So after that, yes, it's copied. I was just double checking is copied correctly. If I just enter correct command or not, I just make sure, double check. Okay, anyway, so notice the command is so the output, you can see that HTML and then ping. So we can now clear the screen. So after copying the content of www root folder, so we will now think there is a small mistake. So we now, okay, think, okay, now done. So there was a small mistakes, the quotation, double quotation. So that's why I was getting error message. Okay, you can now notice that the command creates the new website with uh, this one, the following one. So name is NLB port, ID is 2, state started, physical path is NLB port, so binding, so HTTP 6789. So the next PowerShell types, we need to type one more command. So net okay, so we are now added this new firewall rule. So we have now added the firewall rule successfully on domain member server. So we will now go back to uh, go back to that Windows 8, the workstation machine. Okay, so we are now in the Windows 8 machine. Windows 8 machine. So we are now going to open the website, the server name IIS, so the domain member server. Six seven eight nine. Okay, the port number added. So you can see here, so the NLB, so you can notice here the connections work successfully. It's the default web page of domain member server, and then image with the text of NLB test is displayed. So we will now switch back to the domain member server and click the server manager. Let's see how does it work. So now we go back to the domain member server. So this is a domain member server. So on the server manager, we will now click the tools, select network load balancer. So on the network load balancer, so in the Windows domain member server 0, so in the domain member servers, on the right click, so here we open the network load balancer on domain member server. So there we have to right click and select cluster property. Yeah, so here, yeah, cluster property, and then cluster property. So here we can see the property button. One moment. The port rule. So on the port rule, select the existing port rule. You can just click remove. So notice the defined port is already removed successfully. Now click add, and then so we will now, one moment. So yeah, so yeah, this is correct. So okay, anyway, we will now going to add the following configurations. I mean the both, and then port number, port range is 80. So default here, because last time we added the 65, the different port number. So we are now going to add this 80 to 80, and then multiple host, and then affinity is none. Okay, make sure the affinity is none, then multi-host, then click OK. So now click OK. So we will now going to add one more 6 7 8 9. So now is both multi-host. This one, the filtering mode is a single host. So this is the one we are going to select now this time. Okay, then click OK. So you can see here, so we have now added the successfully the two different port. One is single and multiple. So the mode is single and multiple. So we will now go back to the load balance. Refresh here. Is you can see here is now updating, covering, and then converging and converged. So we can now see the host property. Okay, host property. So the host property, click the port rule. So on the define, here you can see in the define, under define port rules, we can now select the edit button. Edit button. On the edit buttons, so we can make sure, so just making sure everything is okay. So we can see here the 6, 7, 8, 9, so everything is okay, just making sure. So both single, so then click OK. So now you back to the redirected back to network load balancing cluster here. So you can see that converged is successfully done. So last time it was converging, so now it's done successfully. So we will now validate port rules. So the final one, so the port rules is by default distributing the traffic load equally to all the server on the cluster until otherwise specified. So in this task you will access the we will access the member server NLB and then cluster on the member server workstations, and verify the image is fed in the NLB alternately by both hosts on the cluster. To validate the port rules, we will now go back to the another member servers, so domain member server 2. So for that I'm going to switch to domain member server 2. Okay, this is domain member server 2. So we are going to check. Yeah, so this is a domain member server 2. So we now open Internet Explorer. We are now going to check the domain member server 1 IIS, the web page we created. Yes, so you can see the NLB, notice here NLB test. So there's a depot test. Okay, anyway, so there's a editor window. So editor test message you can now see. So we will now close the, wait one moment. Okay, done. So the last one is we are going to validate high availability of NLB cluster. So NLB cluster ensuring high availability of resource to various application running on the cluster NLB. So NLB clusters ensure high availability of resource to various application running on the cluster. So NLB hosts emit the receive alive signals from other hosts on the cluster. If hosts don't receive the alive signal from any of the hosts on the cluster, the surviving host coverage on the cluster to take on the load of failed host. So in this task, so we are going to remove one of the server from the cluster and analyze the effect of the same on the output. So to validate the high availability of NLB clusters, so the first steps we need to connect the domain member server. So we are now going back to the domain member server 1. So we are right now in the domain member server 2. So go back to the domain member. So this is domain member server 1. So here we are going to select here domain member server 1, then click right click there is a suspend button. Okay, control suspend button. So this one, so domain member 0, member server 1 is suspended. You can see here the status. Then we'll now switch back to the domain member server 2. So we are going to type the same thing. So domain PLABDM01. Just refresh. We are going to refresh now. Notice there is no test message appear. So wait, let me let me refresh once again. So you can hear. So last time the notice, so it's now refreshed. You can see here last time the test NLB test message was appeared. Now is not appeared, because if one is down, so other one is automatically working. So we have now successfully tested that installing network load balancing. So on standalone server, and then member server 1, and then configuring a new NLB cluster on the domain member server, and then adding secondary node on the NLB cluster, and the DNS server as well on the domain control 1, and then examining the working of NLB cluster, and configuring and validating port rules for NLB cluster. So we have done successfully. So that's it guys for this video. I hope you guys managed. You can play around with this setup. So lab setups you can try on your own, so you will get clear idea. So please subscribe my channel, press the bell button, and share the video if you like. Press the thumbs up button. So thank you so much guys. Bye bye. We will see you on our next video.